Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Hatherleigh Behavioral Health's Coffee and Chat. I'm your host, Kortney. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, a life coach for student athletes, a stoic leadership coach. I'm a published author at Hatherleigh, and I create CEU courses for Hatherleigh. And we really believe that here at Hatherleigh Behavioral, we're more than just continuing education. We're a place for professionals to come together to connect, collaborate, grow, and learn together. So again, thank you for being here. We have a very special guest today, Madhur-Nain Webster. She's a licensed family and marriage therapist. She has written two books. Her most recent book is Beyond the Pain, Transforming Grief and Disappointment into Growth and Healing. So we're very excited to have you here to talk about this topic. A few housekeeping, make sure everybody is muted. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. You can also introduce yourself in the chat, tell us your profession, where you're from. If you have any questions, we'll be monitoring that throughout this hour-long chat. So thank you again for being here. And if you would like to just introduce yourself and maybe give us a little background on the inspiration for this book.
Yes. Nice to meet you, Courtney, and the fellow folks out there. And yes, my second book is Beyond the Pain. I have it right here. I'm super proud of it. Hatherleigh Press and I did a great job on it. I'm really happy with the turnout. And this book is about the journey and the importance of processing disappointment and grief. And I have found of the 26 years that I've been a psychotherapist that a lot of people don't know how to process disappointment. We tend to really focus more on grief, like the loss of a loved one. And that's the primary process of disappointment and grief. But the thing is that we all experience disappointment all the time from the minute we're born to the minute we pass. And many of us don't know how to deal with it. And so when we don't deal with different kinds of disappointments, they become crutches, they become lenses that influence how we see life. And one of the reasons why I wrote this book is because I had clients over the years who wanted to read something, wanted to know what to do to process disappointments, mostly around breakups and being broken up with and feeling really stuck in that. And there was one book that was out there and it was out of print and you couldn't find it. And so I just decided to write a second book. And the overarching approach to my book writing is I love learning. I read all the time. I listen to audiobooks. I love education. And one of my biggest pet peeves with self-help books is you finish the book and you're like, oh my God, they totally understand what's wrong with me. And then you're like, but I still don't know what to do. I still don't know how to change it. They're not telling me, they're not giving me concrete things to actually make a change. And that drove me nuts as a therapist because I am a solution-focused therapist. That's my overarching approach to my therapy and life coaching. And so I started writing books, and both of my books have really step by step. And one of the things I'm so proud of Beyond the Pain is half the book is a 30 steps on how to process disappointment and grief. So that's what my book is about, and I'm excited to go deeper into it.
I think you bring up a great point, and also as a therapist, I would tell my clients, besides grieving a death, a breakup, I think, is one of the hardest and most difficult things to process. And sometimes people have different feelings around that, or depending on your age, it's like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way, or I should be able to, quote unquote, get over it. And they're not really allowed to always, express their feelings. And to your point too, yes, as a solution focused therapist, we want to be able to provide our clients with tangible, concrete, like tasks and activities and skills that they can use to help them, through this time and to get them to the healing process. So I think I think more self-help books should have that kind of like model to it because I think it can be, very helpful.
Yeah.
Um, so how would you describe, like, what would you define as, grief or disappointment? Because I think, again, distinguishing between, a death of someone and the everyday disappointments that people feel, it's not always a huge thing that happens to us. It's those little things on a day-to-day basis that, like you said, if we don't know how to process and grow from them, that really keeps us stuck.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Grief is often, like as I mentioned before, grief is the piece of processing disappointment of the loss of a loved one. I mean, I have clients who have lost their child, excuse me, their child as well, but also their parent. And it's, at all ages, and it impacts, it's a huge loss, and it's painful, and there's a lot of uncertainty. Disappointment is really a large spectrum. And it can be disappointment is something that we experience hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, and they can be from really small to, um, like a disappointment that I didn't get invited to, all the women at my son's school. My kids are all in college now, but all my son, all the moms at the school are getting together for coffee and they didn't invite me. That's a disappointment. I got broken up with as a disappointment. I didn't get the job I was applying for as a disappointment. I sent a gift to somebody and they didn't send me a thank you card. That's a different kind of disappointment. So disappointments are expectations of how we think something will plan out. Disappointment is an exclusion of something. Disappointment is something we didn't expect to happen. Like a really hard one would be getting a terminal illness. And we have to be able to process the disappointment. And disappointment process is not linear. It's all over. It's upside down, inside out. You're here and you're here and you're bouncing around. And it's really important to be able to process each of the different kinds of feelings, because if you don't process disappointment, then they become what I call lenses. So I actually talk to my clients and speakers about that when we have a pain and a hurt in life, trauma, drama, which after trauma, drama, we have disappointment. If we don't process the trauma, drama, we don't process the different kinds of disappointment of what it means to you. I have a saying, it's not what happens to us, it's how we make sense of it. And the power of talk therapy and the power of meditation and the power of processing and doing our work is we can actually change the story of how we see experiences of life. So back to the lenses is that if we don't process disappointment, which in a linear form, which it's not linear, is shock, denial, anger, sadness, and acceptance. But we bounce all over the place. We can be in shock and then we're sad and then we're really angry and then we're sad again and then we're back to shock and oh my God, I can't believe this happened. So if we don't process our disappointments, if we don't process the stories of our life, then we create lenses that then influence how we look at people, how we look at relationships, how we look at how life treats me. I don't know if you've heard that with your clients, like, why does this always happen to me? It's so unfair. And I just have bad luck. Well, it's a lens.
Right.
So,
Right. And in the book, you say how those disappointments really do shape our identities. And I think
yeah,
it's a great, metaphor to say it is like a lens because of what happens to us is going to change, how we view things. And I
yeah.
think, after reading your book, it's really a book of, personal growth and resilience. And how have you seen that help, your clients once they get to maybe that final stage?
You mean them processing the disappointment and or going through the journey of self-reflection?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that if
Thank you.
if we can look at how we believe, and how we believe is subjective. If we can look at how we believe something or someone or an event is impacting.
You're muted.
Why? I got muted by accident.
It's okay.
Okay,
Just
there we go.
like 15 seconds.
Yeah. So the importance of processing disappointment and getting to acceptance, and I'd like to clarify something. Acceptance is not saying it's okay, it happened.
Mhm.
Acceptance is not saying I'm glad this happened, and like positive psychology, which can be toxic as well. Acceptance is the part of this happened to me, and I have the choice on how it impacts me. I have the choice on how I look at it. I have the choice to change my story. And the thing is that we can get so stuck in the narrative of you did this to me, or this happened to me, or I'm a child of abandonment, or I'm a child that had this trauma, or we can get labeled like, haven't you ever seen those like memes where people are walking around with like this like digital meme, like sayings above their head? I think that we have like 30 or 40 of them above us. And so processing disappointment and feeling the emotions and challenging ourselves, that's a really important piece because we can get so stuck in, but this is true. And this person hurt me and it makes me feel this way. And I get to like behave this way, which I call entitled victim. I got hurt, so I get to treat people with the edge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, you can, but then you're not going to have people in your life.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's that in the book too, it talks about holding, opposing feelings. And that's kind of vital to being, living and being. How does that impact the whole healing process? And how do you get clients to, identify those two different, views and feelings in the
Yeah.
situation?
Yeah, that is such a great topic, Kortney. Here's the thing is so many of us, when it comes to pain, we get stuck. And this is what I tell my clients. Our minds and the way our minds function is in black and white, right and wrong, good and bad, stop and go. It's very linear. That's like if you think about the amygdala is fight, flight, freeze, fix. So when you bring in something like, let's talk about an affair. I have a client I'm working with and around an affair, and I work with a lot of couples as one of my specialties. And one person cheated on the other person. The person that was cheated on really loves their partner. They don't want their marriage to end. They have kids together, but they're so hurt. That is the ultimate journey. I mean, it's in a weird way. It's like if you go to Eastern philosophy, it's that yoga means union. You yoke together. So it's the ability to hold a really hard posture and breathe really deeply and find nirvana. Being married to someone who hurts you and trying to find nirvana is like the ultimate yoga practice if we were to kind of, a little tongue in cheek. So again, back to opposing feelings. I love my partner is I hold that, and I literally do this with my clients. I hold that in one hand in front of them and they hurt me. Both are true. And so then I do a lot of somatic work. I do EMDR and brain spotting and internal family systems therapy. And so part of it is learning how to pause and breathe into that opposing feeling inside of us and learn to hold both simultaneously. Because,
Mhm.
if we go broader, I don't want to get into politics, but if we go broader into the like socialization and culture and country and so forth, one of the things I've had a couple clients bring up is younger clients, like, I don't know if I want to have children. The world's so messed up.
Mm.
And I talk about like, this younger generation don't know, don't obviously don't remember, but don't have the same stories as I do in my 50s with World War II and Vietnam and, the Great Depression and hearing those stories from my grandparents that how do you live a full life and there's suffering and pain. I mean, this kind of gets into philosophical kind of Eastern philosophy, if you will. But part of this is that learning to hold two things. And so the way coming back to your question with clients want things to be linear. They just want a nice little bow, a pill to just kind of fix it. And I look at them, I'm just like, you know what? I'm sorry, it just doesn't work that way. But the thing is, once we exhale, once we learn how to breathe through emotions, once we have tools that we can do, like I have a client who is in her 70s and she's just realizing how toxic her childhood was. And what brought her into therapy originally was that she was being told by friends how negative she was. And she's just negative and mean and says inappropriate things. And as we've been working, she just like has these deep epiphanies where it's really, really painful when she realizes, oh my God, my parents were actually abusive verbally
Mm,
and mentally. And she never ever thought of that in that way. And it was shocking, but it created a click, 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 click. One of the things you said earlier, which I wanted to comment on, is about, solution focus and teaching clients. And I don't know if you heard this in graduate school, but I remember learning like real change happens outside our office.
hmm
It doesn't happen in front of us. We don't get to see the big epiphany and the big shift.
Right.
We sometimes don't even get to hear about it. They just never come back and we're like, are they okay? And then, you know.
Mhm.
So with this client, it's the homework I gave her because she couldn't do meditation. I just gave her an affirmation. I say you say it 3 times in the morning and 3 times at night. And that's it. If you want to do it longer, great. But the thing is giving somebody concrete things like that, is it magic? No. But by using affirmations, there's lots of great tools of mindfulness out there, but that's one tool. Over time, she's replacing that negative narrative that she's been hearing in her head. And I always tell people, if you can see it, you can change it. If you can't see it, you can't change it.
Mm. Now, I always tell clients, you have to tell your brain true things. And at first, you might not believe it, but I tell them you have to say it out loud because the more you do it, then your brain is going to start to believe it. Also, in your book, you talk a lot about self-reflection. And
Mhm.
I do a lot of that in my practice. It's a stoic, daily practice. How do you feel like that really benefits the healing process?
Well, this ties into self-esteem, self-ownership, kind of calling yourself on your stuff. And so part of it is that sometimes I have found, this is like a new, maybe it's not only my own coined phrase, but there's a phrase out there called spiritual bypassing. And I've coined a new phrase called psychological bypassing. There's so much pop psychology out there now with social media, and more and more people go to therapy and they know the language, but they actually have not changed. So self-reflection and self-ownership, which means calling yourself on something, is really important. But here's the thing. Let me back up. Calling yourself on something means that you have the ability to look at yourself and own your negative behavior of how you treat others. None of us are perfect, including myself. I tell people I come from a line of very controlling women on both sides of my family, and I've worked really hard to let go of my controlling tendencies. This is how I talk to my clients. I say, especially my controlling women, I look at them. I was like, I used to be a lot like you. So, but the thing is, so being able to lean into self-reflection is really hard to do unless you have healthy self-esteem.
Mhm.
And I talk about this in my book. I say that self-esteem is a superpower. But here's the ticker, and here's the important piece about self-esteem. It can't be inflated and it can't be deflated. It has to be right in that sweet spot in the middle. Because what can happen is that if we're deflated, if we have low self-esteem and low self-worth, we have really hard time getting feedback from the people we love or our therapists. We get super like whoosh, like, oh my God, you think I'm a bad person. You just think that I'm too much. You don't love me. And you go into that victim space of poor me. If you have an inflated sense of self and someone tells you something, gives you feedback, you go into, who do you think you are? You don't even know me. Why do you have to be so critical? You do that. No, you do that. So, those are extreme versions, of course, but that's what happens. And so there is something about self-esteem that gives us the superpower and the ability to take feedback.
Mm. I could not
Yeah.
agree more.
Yeah,
Esteem, everything goes back to it. And that ability to recognize things in yourself and others, take the, feedback. If we could give everybody the right amount of self-esteem, I think the world would be a better place.
I know. Well, there's two pieces. I mean, yeah, most. I mean, it's interesting if you look at different generations. Like I have a lot of clients in their 70s right now, and then I have clients in their 40s, and I have a couple. I tend to work with adults more than you were mentioning that you work with teenagers and stuff. So, but self-esteem is really important, but it's not tangible. You can't like just say I love myself and then you feel suddenly better. It's an activity. And that's where I talk about short-term and long-term gratification. And the importance of that is it influences self-esteem. Hobbies and activities influence self-esteem. And the importance of, as coming back to short-term and long-term gratification, is that when we have a completion of something in success, and I define success as completed. So writing a book is success. And it's not about publishing the book. It's not necessarily about, it's about finishing it because there's so many people, you can write a book forever. So, gardening, knitting, woodworking, cooking, going for a run, like these things do. The run one is a little bit different because those other things give you a concrete completion that can fill something. It's not about materialism. It's about seeing something you've created that's finished. And it just feels good. And then that gives you the ability to feel better, and then you can get feedback.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of defining success because it's not about, it's all within your control. So you're
Yeah,
not waiting for someone else to give you that, gratification and the satisfaction of the praise. It's what you're
yeah,
doing. And I think, right, that's going to naturally increase, your self-worth and your self-esteem.
yeah,
So talking about self-esteem, you mentioned the difference between healthy shame and toxic shame. Would you
yeah,
mind kind of going into that a little bit more and what the differences are?
yeah. So that work comes out of Terry Real's work and Pia Melody's work, just original. I don't know if we want to kind of give an original form of where that toxic shame phrase comes from. So this ties into three things. It ties into feedback, communication, self-esteem, and connection. So, so shame, and in some of the word, it's interesting. I really love the work of the shame work that's out there. But the thing is that toxic shame is when we believe, excuse me, let me rephrase this. Toxic shame is when we do something and we believe that we're therefore a bad person. Healthy shame, or you could do shame and guilt, or toxic shame and healthy shame. Healthy shame is I did something bad, I cheated on you, and I know I'm a good person.
Hmm.
So when we have toxic shame is really prevalent in our culture right now, and this connects to the self-esteem. To bring that back to that is if it's inflated, if our self-esteem is inflated, our toxic shame is going to be more defensive, justifying. If our self-esteem is low, our toxic shame will go more into deep depression, beating ourselves up, going into poor me, even if we're the perpetrator, if we're the one that hurt. So toxic shame is really tough. I see this a lot in relationships. And if we kind of like take the extremes out for a moment and we just do like everyday life stuff, toxic shame is this like whoosh feeling, like someone comes in and says, like, let's say the night before, a couple sitting in the living room, and the we'll make this a heterosexual relationship and we'll make it traditional male female roles just for the sake of the story. So the man is sitting there and he's, we'll go modern. He's scrolling on his phone instead of reading the paper. He's scrolling on the phone, and the woman keeps trying to have a conversation with him, like, how was your day and what do you think of this? And he's just like, yeah, or completely ignores her. And she's getting a whoosh, like if you had a little bubble above their heads. She's getting a whoosh. He doesn't love me. He doesn't care about me. Why doesn't he give me attention? I'm so tired of this, blah, blah, blah. Let's fast forward to tomorrow. The next day, he comes home from work and she says, hey, Bobby, I'm really upset with you because last night I tried to engage with you and you were just ignoring me and you just don't care about me. So that's a whole communication thing. We're not going to go there today. But then the whoosh happens in him. Why are you picking on me? So that's toxic shame. Why are you picking on me? I'm not such a bad guy. I had a long day at work. You don't understand what I go through. You're always, and then they're off, and then it can escalate into a big fight, and then it gets shoveled under the carpet. So that's how toxic shame looks in everyday life.
Hmm. So toxic shame would be someone who's not a great active listener and almost gets defensive when things are brought up.
Yes, I mean, that's what we see on the outside, but the piece that we as therapists want to focus on is what's happening inside their body. So if I'm sitting with a client or with an individual and I see, I mean, as a therapist, you look at their face even on Zoom, and I'll be like, stop, stop, stop. And I'll look at the one person, I say, put your boundaries up. And I turn to the other person and I say, what is happening in your body right now? What's the story you're making up that she's saying about you? Not what you're hearing, but what you're interpreting. Because in communication, on a side note, there's facts, what actually happened, how we interpret it, what we make up is what influences what we feel. And then in non-communication, how we are influenced by what we make up impacts our behavior.
Hmm.
So it's not what the person actually did that impacts our behavior. It's our interpretation of what they did that impacts our feelings, therefore our behavior, which means that sometimes, a lot of times, how we interpret isn't real.
Right.
So, yeah,
Those cognitive distortions, and then we
yeah,
start believing it. Right.
yeah.
So when you're working with your clients, will you be very direct with them and identify, like use these words with them and identify everything that they're going through so they too then kind of learn and can call out, even, themselves or their partner with different
Yeah.
issues or shame. Okay, good.
Yeah, I call a spade a spade. I always tell my clients, and I learned this from Terry Real, if I see something wrong, I'm going to call it out. But here's the thing that's really important as a mental health worker for all of us. We cannot call somebody on something without giving them the tools how to change it. If we don't tell them and show them and teach them how to change, that's us being abusive. And
Right.
I know that's strong language, but there are some therapists that don't have big solutions, but they'll tell somebody what's wrong with them. And then they leave the room and they're just feeling horrible and they're almost like they're treading water.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it's important to be like, A, you're watching the clock, and B, if you're going to go there, you got to know, okay, here you got to give them two options. This is how we can fix this.
Mm. I
Yeah.
agree. Good point. So in the book, there's a chapter called Through Faith, There is Growth. And you mentioned Viktor Frankl, which is one of my favorite authors
Yeah.
and best mindset ever. But so how do you define faith? And why is that important for people going through the, grieving and disappointment process? Because I
Yeah.
liked how you defined faith. I thought that was not what most people would think of. They think,
I know. I have a cute story. I'm going to tease Hatherleigh Press for a second. When we were working on our book deal, they were like, "Is this a religious book?" And I was like, "No." And I chuckled. And so we talked about this chapter, which I'll tell you now. So I have found through my work that the clients that have a healthy sense of spiritual practice, whether it's religious or non-denominational, they tend to navigate pain and suffering a lot easier than those who have zero faith belief. And I'll define faith in a second in anything. And I understand why spirituality and faith and religion and all of that has had a real stumble in our cultures around the world. I understand that. And I'm not, I don't want to get into that. And yet, when we can anchor ourselves to something that we can't hear, see, or touch, then it gives us a sense of belonging. It gives us a sense of it's like a warm blanket. It gives us a sense of security. And I tell my clients, I don't care what it is. It can be the sun, like we can go back to the real Roman, like philosophers. It can be wind, it can be Christ, it can be Muhammad, it can be your great great grandmother Lucy. Like it really does not matter, but it can't be something you can hear, see, or touch because it is human nature to let people down. And the example I give is parenting. So the relationship between a parent, healthy, between a parent and a child, is the love from a parent to the child is supposed to be unconditional, and the love from a child to the parent should be excuse me, I did that reverse. Should be unconditional from the parent to the child and conditional from the child to the parent. Because if a parent abuses a child should have a boundary. So that's another conversation. But here's the thing is often in our culture now, because we don't have a spiritual practice and tradition because of, the fall of the church and all those things, that we tend to then anchor to the family. But you work with kids, you know what happens in our late teens and early 20s. Parents fall off the the pedestal, and it's supposed to happen. So when then all of a sudden we're emotionally kind of swimming out at sea, treading water, and we don't know what anchors us. So believing in something that's greater than yourself, it's just a side tool to navigate drama and trauma of life and disappointments.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How do you encourage clients that don't have, faith in anything or feel like they have that connection with others or purpose? How would you encourage them to find that?
I think it ties back to some kind of mindfulness practice. So meditation. I'm a huge meditator. I was raised myself in a really strict religious cult and left in my youth and did a lot of my own. I've been doing therapy since 1995. So I've been doing some form of something. I did Course in Miracles. I've done lots of different, organizations and so it's really there is a bit of trial and error. And it's telling people that it's through meditation. It could be walking meditation. It's reading philosophical kind of not necessarily self-help books, but books like Thomas More, Care of the Soul. Um, of course, there's The Hitchhiker. I think it's called The Hitchhiker. I'm bringing up books that I read when I was in college that it just makes you think about the meaning of life and makes you think that I'm a part of an energy force that's greater. So then in mindfulness meditation, when you can start relaxing your mind, more your breath, and you get into that feeling, that's that feeling that you connect. Sometimes with some clients, if you have a really good joining with the client and you have to remind yourself to really stay in the therapeutic space, where what I call that for therapists is being personally impersonal. So I genuinely care about my clients, but they could not ever come in ever again, and I have to let go.
Mhm.
And I have to let go of outcome. They may do the work, they may not. But I still have to personally care because they'll sniff out if I'm just going through the motions. They'll fire you or just ghost you. Um, it's going through that practice. And so it's breath work, it's chanting. And what I was going to say is I have done a lot of research and I bring in a lot of science to help demystify and de-woo-woo-ize it all. And so,
Yeah, I think sometimes clients think, oh, you're going to tell me to deep breathe and that's it. But when they really, when we teach them what it really does to your body and how it affects you, then it's like, oh, okay, I understand fits and it gives them more of like that sciencey kind of background.
yeah.
The
Well,
Alchemist was the book that
That
changed
that's yeah,
perspective.
that's the book too, The Alchemist. I read that. I just bought it. I'll tell you a funny story. My son, who's almost 21, my second son, he got in trouble and I took away his cell phone when he was 14 or something. And he's like, Mom, I really want my cell phone back. And I said, Well, here, I'll make a deal with you. You read this book, The Alchemist, and we talk about it, I'll give your cell phone back. And so he read it at 14 and loved it. And he's read a couple other of his books, like there's Devil and Miss Prim, and there's another one I can't remember. And so he got a cell phone book. And but now he's, like he was in high school and then he's in college now. And professors were like impressed, like you read The Alchemist, and he's like, yeah. And he was kind of like, of course, he didn't tell why he had to read it.
It was,
So
I read it in college, and surprisingly, it was after a breakup.
yeah,
There you go. It worked.
I know. Uh,
Um,
Go
so why
ahead.
don't we get into the 30 stage? model though, and talk a
Yeah.
little bit about how you use it with, clients and how we could maybe apply it to our clients as well.
Yes. So the 30 stages is originally it was 40, and I narrowed it down to 30, and my editor wanted to narrow it down, and I was like, nope. And so the 30 stages is a step-by-step guide on how to process through one scenario of a drama. And as you know, once we read the 30 stages, a person could actually go through, you could skip a bunch of them and do it like in an hour, like a really minor thing. But if it's like, let's say, sexual abuse from your childhood, it might take, years to kind of navigate. So first thing to explain that I just opened it up. So this is kind of for those who are watching. This is like here's stage 13, and this would be anger and low self-esteem is the theme of that stage. And then each stage has the same kind of formula with different interventions for each section. So I talk about basically an example of what's happening cognitively, what the story is in your head at this stage. So when the client or the individual who's reading the book, because here's the thing, a lot of people don't understand what they're feeling. They can't pinpoint it. So when you ask when you ask a client, it's like asking a 5-year-old, how are you feeling, Jimmy? And they look at you like this because there's two things at play. One is they're 5. And two, if neither of their parents show and explain their feelings, the kid doesn't know how, no one's taught them. So, as I've mentioned earlier in our talk, none of us have learned how from our parents, not their parents, but they didn't learn from their parents, not their fault, but we didn't learn how to process disappointments. So the sections tell you what's happening cognitively in your brain, what's happening psychologically at this stage, what's happening physically, and this is something that was really important to me to add, which is when we have anger or sadness or shock or different forms of each of those emotions, it actually creates a physiological shift in our body, like our blood pressure changes, our digestion changes, our sleep pattern. These are all physical things, which then can actually influence us to make bad choices.
Mm.
Like sometimes, like there's one section I talk about, the client or the friend who like they break up, they get dumped by the boy or the girl, and then they end up sleeping with them again. And they're like, I don't know what I was thinking. It just kind of happened. Well, part of it was out of your control because of what was happening physiologically in your body. So when you read this and you understand, like, oh, this is what's happening in me, then the second part, the second half of the stage is actually what to do. So what I do is I give people a psychological, like a journaling and a cognitive reframe on how to work on that emotion. And I give a spiritual practice as well. So, because some people just don't resonate with the woo-woo-ness of things. And so I want to be able to balance it to give tools. So the other thing in the 30 stages is I have it set up where and I'm going to just for the example, it'll be like shock, denial, anger, sadness, anger. So I show that the reader is like, oh, so it's actually normal that I'm back in anger,
Mm.
even though I've been in sadness for 3 days. And I tell everyone, we're all just stinky onions. So we're peeling back the layer. I had one client says, I'm not an onion, I'm a shallot. I said, okay, you can be a shallot then.
Is there one stage that you feel like clients get stuck in the most, or one that's more difficult to help the client through?
Not necessarily the latter. The first part, yes, and it really depends on what the narrative of their childhood experience is. Meaning, coming back to my quote I have, it's not what happens to us, it's how we make sense of it. So if we look at our childhood from a bird's eye view and look at what is the like what's the story? What's the cognitive judgment that I give my childhood? So if we lean towards anger, we're going to get more stuck in anger. If we lean towards poor me, sadness, we'll get stuck in the sadness, depression.
Mm,
So because you'll meet people, I'm sure you can see with your clients, oh, this person just kind of always is always angry. Like everything comes back to like anger for me, and it's every single issue.
mhm.
So it really depends on that. And then this comes into why self-esteem is important because if so coming back, you asked something at the beginning of the stages of how to use it with clients. Here's the thing is giving our clients feedback, if their self-esteem is not intact and we haven't had a good joining with them, it could backfire because they just don't have what they need to hear it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, go ahead. Did you want to say something?
So how would you assess kind of where your client is? And again, do you tell them what stage they're in? Do you try to let them figure it out? I mean, how can we really
Yeah.
assess, where they're at?
Well, there's two ways. One is you can literally, I talk about this in Hatherleigh's CEU course that I did for them, that you can literally have your client purchase the book, get a journal, and start working through the stages. And every week they bring in where they have the whoosh, where they have the trigger, and then the therapist would go deeper on that stage with the client. They would go home and go to the next one. They may have to stay at one stage for a week or 2 weeks, depending on what they're working on. So that's how to use the book with your clients. If you're not using the book and you're just working on disappointment with your clients, the thing is that you make a really good, you ask a good question and it's a good point. Because there's a fine line. You can't always tell your client what the issue is because they won't change. There's a fine line between them having the epiphany and you kind of nudging him that way, because if you just tell them, a lot of clients are it just will go in one ear and out the other, or they'll get defensive,
Hmm.
especially if it's something about them,
Right.
yeah. So part of it is that I mean I am a very direct therapist and I'm pretty blunt, but I don't go there until I know I've joined.
Right.
So I also am really I'm one of those therapists. Within 2 to 3 sessions, we have goals. I
Hmm.
have the goals written down. I say, like, when you're done working with me, what do you want to see changed in your life? I gather information. And then we go, depending on the client, if they're more, if, and again, I wouldn't say this to them, but if they're more distrustful, just their personality, there has to be a little bit of like tiny bit of social kind of like, oh, what you do today? And what did you, oh, you like to cook? What do you like? Oh, my husband likes to cook. Oh, do you had a steak? And so there's a little bit of that versus if they're in crisis, then you got to meet them in crisis. So I don't necessarily say you're in this stage. I just go into if it's depression, anger, and depending on if they still need to be in the stage of telling the story, then I'm a big question like, oh, when did that happen? Who noticed that happened? What did your husband think of that? So I'm trying to get lots of different perspectives. I'm a big note taker because often the client's saying one level of the story, but we as therapists have to catch the bottom part and the upper part, the unconscious, the
Hmm.
projections, the narrative behind the story of this always happens to me, like where they're stuck. Because and then well, there's two things. If they're stuck, if we just talk about their story, they're going to get stuck in the story. Haven't you ever? I found with some therapists and even myself, I have to work really hard to not get stuck into just being in the story with them.
Hmm. I've had many people going through divorce. Every session, they tell me the same thing
Yes.
over and over again. And I have to be like, I remember that you told me that last session, but it's just they need to get that out.
Yeah.
They're not in a stage yet to really, process it. They're almost just like, their facts, telling us what it is. But yeah, it can be difficult.
Yeah.
Um, so, a lot of clients they'll resist, processing grief because they think it can be very, overwhelming. Or like you said, and we kind of answered, they have to be, in the right spot to do that.
Yeah.
But are there any other techniques to kind of help them build that, emotional like tolerance for the distress that they might be feeling? I always tell clients, sometimes it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yes.
We try and teach them those skills, but is there anything, specific to, the disappointment and grief? I know I was going to say this before too. We can't tell them, oh, this is where you're at, or this is how you should feel. But I think in the book too, you even have the self-reflection prompts. And I
Hmm.
think that's a great tool because they can kind of do it on their own. And even though you've kind of laid out that groundwork, they come back and be like, oh, I realized this. And you're like, oh, excellent. Like, you had that epiphany like you were talking about before. But is there
Yeah.
anything else that we can kind of, put our clients at ease to say, this, it might be difficult, but it's going to be, beneficial, in
Yeah.
the end.
Yeah. I mean, you're you tap into this piece of people are afraid to sometimes like people have really, really big traumas. Like sometimes they don't want to open up Pandora's box and they'll say, "Oh my God, I'm never going to stop crying," or "I'm never going to be sad," or "I'm just going to sink." And Pia Melody has a quote, "You have to hug your demons or they'll bite you in your ass." Pia Melody is the founder of codependency. She was at the Arizona rehab place. She's written tons of books, really, really good. And and I say that to my clients, you have to hug your demons or they'll bite you in your ass. And there's tons of research that talks about the after effect of the suppression of our emotions. And feelings, and I tell clients, feelings cannot kill you, but suppressing them can. And so part of it is you just work on practicing to feel. And so that's where somatic work comes in our office, like doing meditating with the client, doing EMDR, doing IFS, doing brain spotting, and teaching them in the session how to feel the emotion. And so part of it is, when you're talking to the client and you notice their face changes and you notice anger or sadness, I literally stop, I lean in, and I say, go ahead and feel that.
Mm,
Just breathe into it. Where do you feel it in your body? Oh, in your left shoulder? Great. Feel it in your left shoulder. Does it have a shape? This is when I kind of go into IFS stuff. And you just do that, and then you teach them when you're at home, you can do the same. The other intervention that I give is that at the end of the day, when you're laying in bed, just ask, like laying there, contemplate what did you feel that day? You don't have to analyze it. You don't have to make sense of it. You just have to notice. What did I feel that way? What emotions? Did I feel some anger or shame or embarrassment or happiness or whatever it is? Just take note and then go to bed and do it the next day. Because if you can't see it, you can't change it. But
mm.
if you can see it, then you can change it.
Right. I think, the takeaways that like self-awareness. And a lot of
Yeah.
times I ask my clients, what was the best thing that happened this week? What was, a not so great thing that happened? And some of them really struggle with it because they
Yeah.
really have to think about, oh, okay, what was, how did I feel about things rather than just kind of going through the motions, of the day. But I like how you bring in, like the body aspect of it. With younger clients, we would do an outline of a body and they'd have
Mhm.
color, for a feeling, and they'd have to draw it in where they feel it in their body.
Yeah.
And it was really great because it was, eye-opening to them too, or they would know, oh, okay, my tummy's starting to hurt, so maybe I'm feeling this way. And it just gives them more knowledge. Sometimes I do it with adults too
Yeah.
because it just gives them more knowledge and they didn't even realize like, oh, like I hold all my stress like in my shoulders, or I didn't realize, this is how my body is feeling. So it's a nice little like, okay, red flag, when I'm starting to feel this way, what's going on in my brain, what am I telling myself? And then what you do too, you have the tools. Okay, if I'm feeling this way, what can I do to either calm down my breathing, reframe my thinking? And I think it really empowers the client and makes them feel like, okay, I have some control over, my responses, to my emotions. And that's going to make me, be able to process situations differently and kind of get through, that grieving process and onto the healing process. So I think you
Yeah.
have a really good model of kind of balancing both the body, the mind, spirit, everything. And I think it can be really helpful to a lot of clients and clinicians. All right,
Well,
so
that's the last thing I just wanted to add, I think is, and I talk about this in the 1 hour workshop with Hatherleigh Press, which is really, really important. We practitioners have to do our work.
mm,
You cannot tell your client to do this and do that if you don't do it. Now, we're human and obviously we have bad days, but they can sniff out if you don't walk your talk. And it's really important to do your work. And that's one of my biggest things that I tell people, the practitioners.
mhm. All right, so if there's one piece of advice you could give behavioral health professionals in working with people who are grieving or going through disappointment, what would it be? Or if they're starting their work with
Yeah.
behavior
Yeah.
with grief.
Well, I would say that the biggest advice or suggestion would be to to lean into what you're feeling and challenge your thoughts. That's what I would say. I would say lean into what you're feeling and challenge what you're thinking because what you're thinking may not be 100% like perfectly correct.
Hmm. Good.
Yeah.
I don't see any questions. I think you answered
Okay.
everybody's questions, which is great. And again, I would like to thank you again for being here and for everybody listening. Just a reminder, you can get a CE credit on Hatherleigh Behavioral Health's website for the book Beyond the Pain. Our coffee and chat next month is Thursday, September 18th, and it is with Sophia Galano, and she is talking about adolescent anxiety. So we hope to see everybody there, and I hope everybody has a great rest of the week.
Awesome.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
all for coming.